Hello, welcome to the Future of Telecoms, a vision beyond targets, an online roundtable of the Internet Lab Exchange. I'm Caroline de Kock from Information Labs, and I'm very happy to moderate this, what I expect to be a great discussion. Today, our speakers will shed some light on what they see as the key catalysts for a successful future of telecoms in the EU, or of connectivity. Reflecting on the European Commission white paper on the future of connectivity, which is open for comments until 30 June. Our panel of experts range from a representative of the forthcoming Hungarian Council presidency to stakeholders that represent various layers of the internet stack, as well as consumers and academia. Each speaker should be bringing a unique viewpoint, I expect, and we look forward to a lively and informative discussion. For the people that are following the live stream, a Q&A will be held at the end, so feel free to drop questions in the comments, and we will do our best to address them. So thank you all for joining us today, and without further ado, let's begin with Petra. What can we expect from the Hungarian presidency?
Thank you very much, Caroline, and thank you for having me on this panel, and good afternoon to everyone, to all the colleagues here in the panel and online. I think discussing the future of telecoms is both very timely and essential, given that the public consultation is still ongoing on the Commission's white paper, and it is still open until the end of this month. And I think it's a good basis for having this discussion on the future of the telecom sector. We have had ministerial level discussions already in the Council on the future of the sector at formal and informal Council meetings as well. And what we can say based on those discussions is that maintaining a safe and sustainable digital ecosystem is essential for preserving the digital sovereignty and the independence of the EU. We have had an intensive legislative period behind us, and the implementation of the adopted pieces of legislation is of utmost importance. These regulations are designed to create a framework that can support the growth and resilience of the digital infrastructure. And by ensuring that these legislative measures are effectively put into practice, we can promote innovation, maintain a competitive edge in the global market. But of course, the white paper has identified several challenges that are present in the telecom sectors. These challenges range from technological advancements to investment requirements, as well as the lack of level playing fields and the fragmentation of the EU telecom market. And with the 12 scenarios that are put in the white paper, the aim is to address those challenges, and as digital infrastructures play a crucial role in the EU's global competitiveness. It is also proposes some adjustments to the current regulatory framework, incentivizing investment in digital infrastructure and enhancing their security and resilience. As a strong and robust digital infrastructure allows the EU to utilize the technological development and to attract investment. But let's not forget about consumers, because consumer welfare is something that has to be at the forefront of our discussions. And as we develop our digital infrastructure, it is essential to ensure that the benefits of these advancements result in good quality and accessible services for citizens. And by prioritizing consumer welfare, we can build trust and confidence in the digital economy, ensuring that all members of society can fully participate and benefit from the technological progress. And we should reevaluate the regulatory framework of the telecom sector in a sensible and inclusive way. I think it's really important. But besides consumers, we should also focus on our environment as well, as environmental sustainability of the digital technologies should be part of the debate on the future of the sector. The greening of the digital networks can help achieve the climate targets, and that could also contribute to the digital and green transitions. And as we are about to begin our presidency very soon, our primary objective in the field of telecoms will be to contribute to somehow pave the way for the future of the sector by preparing and adapting Council conclusions that will reflect the insights of the white paper. because it will be an opportunity for member states for drawing insightful conclusions on the future of the sectors. And most possibly the conclusions will reflect also on the relevant elements of the Lotte report, and most probably of the upcoming Draghi report as well. So it will be a really important task for us as presidency to streamline the different opinions of the member states into one cohesive council conclusions. These different perspectives are expected to certain topics where it might be really challenging for us to achieve a consensus, but our aim is to harmonize these different views and ensure that our conclusions reflect a balanced and unified approach. And this will enable us to address the various needs of member states by promoting a coherent approach for the future of the telecom sector. And having said that, the constant dialogue with the stakeholders is also very important. So therefore, we as presidency will have several events during our presidency, and let me briefly just mention those that can contribute to the discussions on the future of telecoms. So we will have expert level workshops. We will have one on environmental sustainability in the telecommunications and space policy in July. And it will aim to address the topic of environmental sustainability with a horizontal approach. And hopefully it will facilitate the discussion between industry players, policymakers, innovators to map the challenges ahead and pave the way for the future initiatives. And on the very topic of the future of telecoms, we will organize a conference in Budapest in October. And the aim for this event is to bring together the heads of the European telecom regulators, the telecom attachés, industry players, and we will explore the future of telecom sector in light of the white paper there in Budapest. And the outcomes of this event will contribute to our council conclusions, which are planned to be adopted at our formal council meeting in December. And I'd like to have just one final point to make before I give the floor back to Caroline. That besides having our conclusions on the future of telecoms in light of the white paper, at the council meeting in December, we will put another highly relevant topic on the agenda in terms of the future of the sector. So we plan to have a high-level ministerial policy debate on the digital decade targets. And I think I stop here and give back the floor to Caroline. Thank you very much for listening to our plans. Over to you, Caroline.
Thank you, Petra. Busy days ahead for you, I guess. You will need this summer break to be in shape to address so many things, and good that you will also look at the digital decade aspects. I think it resonates with our title, A Vision Beyond Targets, to a certain extent. Let me now switch to Brian, who just co-authored a report financed by Google on the EU Universal Service Fund idea, which is flagged into the white paper. And you also released a totally independent paper on the future of connectivity, because you were bored and you wanted to do two things the same week. So how does an economist look at the white paper and the peripheral debate about the future of connectivity?
So first I'll say something about why consider universal service a universal service fund. Why did we think about that issue? It was in part because fair share was a proposition on the table, and that, I suppose to put it mildly, did not find wide support. And then the EC white paper in February made a number of points. One of them was that achieving the 2030 fibre targets was, in their words, in doubt. So there's a desire to find additional funding. They mentioned that the white paper mentioned that sector financing had so far been limited to electronic communication service providers. So there's kind of a hint there that they might want broader funding, and also that the concept of universal service was mentioned. It didn't find widespread support, but as an alternative, it seemed to be something worth considering. So I'll start with, and this is in a sense getting into the economics of it, what advantages first might it have over the concept of fair share? And one of them is that you could decouple the raising of revenue from traffic, from internet traffic. And the advantage of doing that, to the extent that you can, is you reduce the harmful impact on the demand side. If you tax internet traffic, you'll reduce internet traffic, you'll discourage the use and development of applications. And so if you decouple the funding from traffic, that would help to reduce that impact. And potentially you could broaden the funding to general taxation, in which case you've removed that effect. The other advantage is that a universal service fund would explicitly, or should explicitly, tie funding, additional funding, to incremental investment. You might have some sort of competitive process to decide what gets funding, and you would expect something in return. Whereas that was always a bit unclear with the fair share proposition. The telcos might get additional money, but would you get additional investment? Well, there's no additional incentive to invest, so not necessarily. And now to the disadvantages, which to an extent are more practical. The first one is establishing a fund would be contentious and take some time. And to give an example of why it might be contentious, in a European context, you would be giving money to member states and to consumers, in a sense, in member states who were further behind in delivering on the 2030 targets, and taking money from consumers or taxpayers in member states that have made more progress. And I think inevitably that would be contentious and might be a point of resistance. The other practical point is, if you're trying to get additional investment by 2030, by the time you got a new mechanism in place, it's probably too late to help. But actually it's worse than that, because once you start seriously debating the introduction of an additional funding mechanism, investors, and that could be both governments and private investors, may hold out given the prospect of universal service funding. So you might actually get less investment or delayed investment. So the conclusion is, if you want to do more to support network investment before 2030, the sensible thing to do is probably to do more of what we're doing now, which is state aid funding of projects. And where justified, and there's a disagreement about what that might entail, removal of barriers to investment. Obviously, if they're not justified, they should go. And quite a lot of work has been done in relation to that. But I think there's more to it than that. And the title of the paper kind of points to this. We called it Funding Improvements in the European Broadband Experience, because we think it's the experience that consumers and users have that matters, not the actual network per se. So if you can deliver a better experience in other ways, that should be on the table as well. So an example is improved compression, which is something that's happened, but there are many other examples of things you can do to improve the experience of connectivity. And there's two additional points that really relate to the other paper we did, which wasn't funded by anybody. That was just a think piece. And they follow from all of this fairly naturally. And one of them is that we know that the growth of internet traffic has been declining, the growth rate. And there's good evidence that the kind of incremental demand for higher bandwidth is also declining. You get to a certain speed and it's enough. And that kind of isn't progressing up in the way it might have been historically. So there's a question about what users need. And to answer that question, you have to look at what future applications there might be. So there could be a dialogue around that. But I think the kind of assumption that everybody's going to need a gigabit per second, which might have been the case 5 years ago, that we believe that would be the case in 2030 is called into question by the evidence. The other thing we've seen change in a fairly significant way is the supply side with, in particular, low Earth orbit satellite constellations. Starlink is in place and others are planning to develop these networks. So there are more options in terms of how you would deliver universal service. Now, not necessarily a gigabit per second, but something that might be enough for people in remote areas in particular. And so we think it is timely, in a sense, to start rethinking the objectives, not necessarily because we're in a post-2030 world, but because we're coming up to it, because it's acknowledged by the white paper that we may not deliver on the targets, and we have to start thinking about, you know, what do we do post-2030? And I think we should kind of think seriously about a different approach to what the one that's been taken up to that point. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And I guess that puts all of the onus on Petra organizing a conference on the digital targets. I think let me now switch to Lotte from GSMA, because Lotte, am I right in thinking that the white paper comprises quite a few ideas that your members agree with, or at least see as good things to look into?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Caroline, for the word, and thank you for inviting the GSMA to this online debate. I just for the I know everyone here knows, but just for the wider audience, I just want to highlight that, and needless to say, that connectivity is important for Europe, for the competitiveness of Europe, as a foundation for technologies and innovation, and also as a means to ensuring cohesion and inclusiveness for the citizens. And of course, recent events have also reminded us that advanced telecom networks are indeed important if we are to remain secure and resilient in this unpredictable environment we're in. Before going to the white paper, I also just wanted to set the stage. So the white paper is indeed interesting from the point of view that it actually paints a narrative that we very much agree with. Our sector is not doing very well. It is weak, and we feel that we are prevented from getting higher returns. We are facing large investment ahead of us, not least to meet the decade targets, but also to transform our networks and to help digitize the European private and public sector. We have been able to invest over the last years, but a lot of that fall back on the fact that many of our members have been spinning off assets like the netcos, like the towercos, and they can only be spinned off once. So now we see that our members are also exiting markets. So it's really not a sign of a healthy sector. But coming back to the white paper, and I'm conscious of time, of course, there are three areas that I would like to touch on. As I said, we very much agree with the Commission's narrative, and we also are encouraged by some of the scenarios that they are putting forward. Indeed, completing the digital single market is one of the keys to unlock the challenges that we have. As you may recall from the white paper as well, the financial sector exactly pointed to the fact that the industry, the telecom industry, is too fragmented, and this is the single market is indeed one of the keys to improve for telecom operators. So 3 areas. Addressing the fragmentation by completing the single market, accepting the need for scale, which is also very prominent in the white paper, and finally embedding a level playing field and fairness in the value chain. These are 3 of our priorities. Obviously, we also have priority within the area of spectrum, but there I would refer to our contribution, our very comprehensive contribution that we will upload here by the end of the month. fragmentation is really the barrier to the single markets and prevent operators from achieving the much needed scale. It's a result of many years of implementation of directives, and they take different forms at national level. It's also the result of non-sector specific regulation that is also adding to the fragmentation. And finally, it's also the result of, you can say, an extra layer of fragmentation due to the fact that telcos and other players in the value chain are actually increasingly competing, but they are facing different frameworks. So we think there are good, you can say, ideas in the white paper that these barriers should be taken down. And one of the ways to doing that is to consider the technological development to see if, there is a scope for basically applying the same service, same rule. And also there could be scope for actually making some of the regulation obsolete. Streamlining the regulation that could, some of the sector-specific regulation could actually be transferred to the horizontal regulation. And finally, we could see that the remaining regulation should be harmonized as much as possible. So this is really 3 steps that we think should be taken when revising the new regulatory framework. We appreciate very much also the thinking of the Commission in terms of addressing the possibility of central single core networks. And we've spent a lot of time in the GSMA to discuss the country of origin principle, the pros and the cons. And we've come to the conclusion, at least for now, that right now, exactly for the reasons I said before, the fragmented regulation, there will be a lot of work to do before this country of origin principle really could have an effect. And we also think there is a timing issue that needs to be considered. Then coming to the question of scale, it is repeated several times in the paper. And the answer to the scale question is that cross-border consolidation is the way forward. Again, we think that cross-border consolidation, again, will meet the challenges in terms of fragmented markets. So we think that consolidation will have to start at the level of in-market consolidation. The merger regulation have not been changed for 20 years. A lot have happened over these 20 years. So it could be a good time to consider the merger regulation and how it assesses consolidations. And also to say that competition policy should probably not be, be seen in isolation. It could be a possibility to see it in the context of the single market. I want to mention here that talking about consolidation, the GSMA does not see an end goal or an end result where we have 2 or 3 big market players in every corner of Europe. We want consolidation because we want a variety of players in the market. We want big, healthy, sustainable players. We want multi-country players, single market players, MVNOs, etc., etc. And then finally, the question of fairness in the value chain. And there I can only say that we appreciate that the European Commission has mentioned a possibility of a dispute mechanism and implicitly suggesting that there could be an obligation for the players in the internet value chain to negotiate. Already now, and indeed looking forward, there will be increasing cooperation between telcos and large content providers and others, and they will also compete. So it will only be natural that there is, you can say, such a relationship is being brought into a proper framework. And we think that this mechanism actually should be part of the legislative proposal that result from this consultation. I hope I stayed within the 5 minutes, but thank you.
Thank you, Lotte. It's funny because I think we just need to make a slogan for all topics when we talk to the EU, with less fragmentation and more streamlining. I think that pretty much applies to everything that they're doing. Let's now look at the perspective of what is called the alternative operators. Pinar, what is your assessment of the white paper and the likelihood that it delivers a future for telecoms that your members would support?
Thank you so much, Caroline. Thank you for this kind invitation to this public debate, also from my side. Well, I would like to start with the initial point of the discussion at the white paper, which is the state of art of the electronic communications market in the EU. So I have to tell, with respect to Lotte, we have a much more optimistic view on the state of art of the electronic communications market. We think that the electronic communications regulation and the outcomes it delivered have been a unique success story for the past 3 decades. Firstly, diversity of the market players, both large and small, has been paramount for encouraging innovation at a time when the EU's economy is digitalizing. So on that one, I would agree with Lotte, that was calling on the diversity. So we fully agree with it. In fact, we also believe that the promotion of the competitive markets combined with effective ex-ante regulatory measures have been the driving force behind the investments, positive innovation, and consumer benefits in telecoms. We think that Europe is not in a bad shape at all. Europe truly excels with respect to its global peers when it comes to combining the deployment of gigabit networks, their adoption by consumers and professional users, as well as affordability and inclusion. So we have quite a positive view on the state of EU electronic communications market. We recognize that there are some issues to be solved, such as lack of adoption of the very high capacity networks with respect to their deployment rate, and the difficulties and uncertainties encountered so far by the operators deploying very high capacity networks due to the heterogeneous and multiple national and local deployment regulations. But existence of those issues surely do not imply that the sector is doing bad, and it does not mean that in terms of investments, deployment, and affordability and inclusion is lagging behind with respect to its global peers. On the opposite, the data and evidence show that EU excels in FTTH deployment and in 5G standalone vis-a-vis United States, as it is confirmed by the recent European Parliament report. And several EU member states are in fact world leaders. Europe excels also in the affordability and inclusion of broadband offers. So the EU 27 has the lowest prices for triple play offers among all speed categories, and prices for bundles in all speed baskets are lower in the EU 27 than in Japan, United States, Norway, Iceland, except those in the United Kingdom, which has been a full EU member until 21st of January 2020 and has not materially changed the applicable legal framework. When it comes to the investments by the biggest telcos in the EU vis-a-vis those made by the biggest telcos in the US, which is a strict oligopolistic market with poor wholesale access regulation, the picture for Europe is positive and not catastrophic as painted by the biggest incumbents for their lobbying purposes and as encountered in some parts of the white paper. Finally, when it comes to the financial performance of the EU telcos vis-a-vis United States telcos, a recent study by the Belgian National Regulatory Authority analyzes the profitability of a sample of publicly listed telecoms operators. The study reveals that profit margins and return on capital have remained stable in the European telecom sector over the past decade, with no noticeable gap or decrease of it. This has not had any negative impact on the investments of the player, which have been steadily contributed to the infrastructure deployment, be it FTTH or 5G. Then, as a second biggest issue in the white paper, I would like to touch on an issue which is a real concern, in fact, for our association and our members, and I believe also for the EU consumers, businesses, and public administrations. The EU Commission's white paper prospects in scenario 5, bullet point 2, a change at access policy. which in our humble opinion does not only make sense, but if it will be approved and implemented, it risks to bring significant harm to the EU competitiveness. Because we think that it lacks of credible motivation, it also implies that on the basis of data and evidence, there is no need to dismantle the regulatory framework governing the wholesale access in the EU markets. First, because the regulatory framework regarding the wholesale access is already a self-extinguishing framework. According to the code, markets are regulated only and only if there is a substantiated need to do so in light of the national regulatory authorities' market analysis proceedings. Secondly, we think that as of today, the Commission's list of markets susceptible to ex ante regulation comprises 2 markets as a result of a review process which diminished the original relevant markets from 18 to 2. Again, as of today, the NRAs are steadily deregulating the markets, both the ones that are not included anymore in the Commission's 2020 recommendation and the ones included in the Commission's 2020 recommendation. Therefore, when an NRA identifies an operator as holding significant market power, there is a real need to proceed with regulation that is specific to address the competition problem. Thus, attempting to dismantle the existing EU regulatory framework not only fails to make sense, but in our opinion, for this reason, it risks causing significant harm to the competition in those markets that are not yet ready for deregulation. So, in general, we reject the notion that the deregulation should be imposed through a political decision. I would leave here, of course, I will not focus on there are points in our opinion are positive, so we will give our factual and as usual positive contribution in our response. But in order to not go further with the 5 minutes, I would leave here and we'll be happy to take questions, if any, later on. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you, Pinar, and thank you for being mindful of the 5 minutes. It is a challenge to stick to 5 minutes when the topic is the future of telecoms. So I appreciate it, and thank you for the positive outlook and the positivity on the landscape of telecoms in Europe. Let's move beyond the clouds now. As I give the floor to Jordi from Amazon, but not the cloud or shopping Amazon that you need to off. No, this is Amazon Satellite talking. Go ahead, Jordi.
Thank you, Caroline. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks a lot for the invitation to the webinar, and thanks for the comments from the previous panelists. As you were saying, I work for Amazon's project Kuiper, and for those of you who don't know, Kuiper is Amazon's low Earth orbit satellite constellation that was announced in 2019, and we're planning to have more than 3,000 satellites in LEO to provide high-speed broadband to unserved and underserved communities around the world, including in the European Union. We are developing low-cost customer terminals that would allow us to serve residential enterprise customers, mobile network operators for satellite backhaul, and also mobility use cases. We have announced that our 3 customer terminals will be able to provide up to 100 megabits, 400 megabits, and up to 1 gigabit per second download speeds. So I'll make 3 comments or 3 reflections from my side. I will start with the customer. As a company that strives to be Earth's most customer-centric company, we always start from the customer and work backwards from there. And I think if you look at the data today in terms of what broadband customers want today, you can see that the average fixed broadband download speed in the EU is around 80 megabits per second in 2023, sorry. And to a large extent, that is the choice of customers, because we already in 2022, we had 73 percent household coverage with gigabit capable network. So what that means is that the vast majority of customers are choosing to stay in lower speed plans rather than taking up gigabit plans. There's a question about what will the future look like for in terms of demands from customers, but I will just repeat what Brian said earlier, that it seems very unlikely with the evidence that we have right now that customers will be asking for 1 gigabit per second speeds by 2030. We see a declining traffic growth both on fixed and mobile networks. And one thing that Brian didn't mention, but that I will add to that discussion, is that in parallel, you have content and applications providers that are, on the one hand, bringing content closer to the end user, which decreases as well the bandwidth requirements on telecoms networks. And on the other hand, we are also innovating a lot on compressing traffic in order to reduce the required download speeds by end users. So that's my first point. The second point is, well, given this situation, what are the risks of the current telecoms policy framework? And I think one of the risks that we see is that if the telecoms policy's main focus is on supply side targets and on a specific technologies, like right now with fiber for fixed broadband, we could end up with a policy that is on the one hand disconnected from demand and therefore disconnected from what customers want, and a policy that delivers inefficient outcomes for citizens, businesses, and governments. So I guess that brings me to my third point, which is what could be done instead. What would be the alternative? And I will end where I started with the customer. And I think what we think should be done is that we should bring the consumer back to the center of telecoms policy, both in the digital decade and in the white paper. And this means that there should be a greater focus on the demand side. And that this means that initiatives that impose levies on demand are the opposite of what is needed right now, and that be it in the form of the internet levy that we had last year, or the internet levy 2.0 that we have this year with the dispute resolution mechanism, or the contributions to universal service funds, which are a internet levy in disguise. And so what we need to do instead is to focus on bridging the digital divides in a timely manner for the benefit of customers, ensuring that everyone has good connectivity rather than pushing for a specific gigabit connectivity using a certain technology. And on this, we are fully supportive of the Hungarian president's wish to initiate a debate on the digital decade targets. We support a review of the targets and the recognition of new technologies such as LEO broadband that can meet end users' needs in terms of download speeds, and can do that in a more timely manner and at a lower cost than fiber networks in remote and rural areas, saving governments billions in taxpayer-funded fiber subsidies. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordi. I wasn't expecting the satellite panelists to bring us with our 2 feet back on the ground so quickly. And thank you for acknowledging demand and consumers. Now, having looked at various infrastructure perspectives, to put it broadly, let's move up the internet stack and switch to Meta and Phillip. How does Meta perceive the vision expressed in the white paper and your role in the internet ecosystem?
Yeah, thank you very much, Caroline. Thanks for the invite. It's been a really interesting tour through some of the issues so far from the speakers. I think there's a sense of deja vu in a lot of these conversations. I've been involved in debates around the European telecom sector now for approaching 2 decades, and I think notions around consolidation and others have been abound for at least that long. As Jordi rightly did as well, I think I'll try and pursue 3 main points here. Firstly, you mentioned Meta and sort of our role here in the ecosystem and what we do as a company. I think firstly, I'll begin with just a very simple premise that I think often goes unsaid, but is quite obvious, is that companies such as ourselves, and also symbiotically with telecoms operators, have a significant incentive to ensure that our products and services are offered in an efficient manner. As you already mentioned, we do an awful lot of work in terms of research into compression technologies. A lot of that research for us happens in Paris at our Fundamental AI Research Center in Paris. A couple of examples: our audio compression technology, which offers a 10x compression on audio technology. Of course, these are things we open source as well, so to add to the community and to ensure that the state of the art and the state of the possible is something which is able to be used and utilized by everybody. I think, you know, our role in investing in complementary infrastructure in terms of global investment in subsea cables, but then also in terms of the infrastructure, which ensures that we're able to deliver our content and services as close to users as we can, but then also in terms of the impact and the positive impact that has on network efficiency and reducing cost for telecoms operators as well. So we play a significant role there, and we see it purely as a complementary symbiotic relationship, which for a long time has functioned in a good manner. Secondly, I think we discussed yesterday, Caroline, our vision or our work when it comes to our hardware. The metaverse has been a buzzword, and of course it's more than that for us as a company. But primarily we see a lot of the applications or a lot of the hardware which we're working on is primarily a fiber and Wi-Fi connectivity environment in which they're going to function and operate in an optimal manner. That's why I think in the white paper there is a lot of discussion about 5G IoT. I think there needs to be a lot of discussion about the future of Wi-Fi. I would guess that every single person on this call right now is using a Wi-Fi based connection. You can correct me if I'm wrong at some point, but I think that's probably the case. And so I think that's a really important reflection onto one of the key areas of the white paper as we go forward. 75% of Meta's traffic is delivered via a Wi-Fi network in Europe. And so that is something which for us is a key technology and will continue to be a really important part of the technological mix that makes up the positive connectivity environment that Europe has going forward. Secondly, I'll just make some brief discussions on the white paper. I won't delve into USO very much. I think Brian's done a fantastic job in kind of setting up the framing for USO. I think if we are to revise USO or revisit USO, we need to really break down its purpose. I think that's often not really explored very well. I think it's become a sort of shortcut discussion about how do you move money around. That's not what USO is. It's not what it's designed for. It's not what the law says. And so to have a proper discussion about that, I think Brian's pointed to some of the key fundamentals around that. I think the important one also is this notion of investment certainty for also a lot of alternative investment providers which have now come into the market to invest in specifically fiber infrastructure that are not incumbent operators, that are not telecom operators, that have come in and invested very heavily in a market in which they are hoping for long-term regulatory predictability. I'll also just quickly reference, I think, the dispute resolution mechanism that Jordi and Lotte and others have pointed to. I just think it's the wrong name for it. I mean, the conversations that I've been having across the board, I think this is more, the desire of it is to be more a dispute creation mechanism. And, you know, broadly, we have relationships with thousands of operators around the world. By and large, they are seamless, they are working very well, and they lead to a very high quality end user experience. So I would like to drill down on the value of such a mechanism, which seems to me to have the purpose to surface dispute rather than resolve it. And I don't think that'd be an efficient use of anyone's time and resource. I think we've already spent a number of years, probably wasted years in my view, talking about the issues around network fees and others. And I think it's probably time to have a very clear and robust discussion about really what matters in the future of connectivity. I think some of our previous speakers have pointed to that. in a very, very healthy manner. Finally, I think we talk about beyond targets. I don't think it's necessary. Well, actually, we need to focus on targets to a certain extent. I think we seem to forget. We get very, very hyped up around targets around fiber, 5G, and others, which, don't get me wrong, is a fundamental discussion we need to have in this continent. The often unspoken piece, and we don't see many hours going into these in marketing campaigns and others, is the fact that Europe is also missing on its key uptake targets around small business utilization of cloud, for example, around some digital skills as well. And as has been pointed out, perhaps we do see a moment where the demand side issues are leading to a tailing off in exponential supply growth. So I would like to see, as we talk about the future of telecoms, or more accurately, future connectivity, that you have a really, really robust debate about why are we missing these key core targets, which are actually the reason why we do these things. So, Caroline, I'll leave my comments there and look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you for also clarifying the metaverse and how it will use technology or bandwidth. And I'm probably the only one with an Ethernet cable, I'm guessing, not using Wi-Fi the old-fashioned way. So let me now switch to another perspective. We've heard from the companies, so let's now look at the users, the consumers. And Cláudio, I did a quick Control F on the white paper, and I got 74 hits for the term investment, singular and plural. And I had 13 hits for the term consumer or consumers. So is that a good thing, Cláudio?
No, it's not. Thank you so much, Caroline, first and foremost, for the invitation. It's great for BEUC, for European Consumer Organization. It's always a pleasure to have the opportunity to expose the consumer perspective, especially on such an important topic as this is. So from first perspective, indeed, no, it's not a good thing. And this is primarily the main criticism we have when it comes to the white paper, which has already been quite profusely discussed today already, which is indeed the absence of consumer perspective. And this is not something that, let's say, something new. We've been kind of having the feeling of a Groundhog Day for the past 2 years when it comes to the discussion of the future of telecoms. And one of the criticisms we have made since the beginning is that indeed there is a significant lack of consumer perspective and a failure to put the consumers front and center of this policy, which, may I add, has been probably the reason why the regulation has been such a success story, as it already been said here today. And it is true, the liberalization of the EU telecoms sector regulation over the past 3 decades was a fantastic success story, and that is precisely because we placed consumers first. We had a pro-competitive, consumer-centric approach in which the focus was to look at the problems to the consumer perspective and remove barriers to the functioning of the single market and ensure that consumers can have access to the best quality services, but also to the service that they need at prices they can afford. So now that we are talking once again about the potential of reopening these rules, we need to fundamentally ensure that the consumer perspective stays again front center. On that, I really appreciate, at BEUC, we really appreciate the commitment of the Hungarian presidency. Let me make that note, to engage in this discussion and to make a representative discussion about this. We also welcome the conference in Budapest, just making, of course, also the note, if I may, it is very important if we don't have this discussion, we not just have the regulators and the industry present. It's fundamental we have the consumers also for perspective considered. And so just letting you know that from our side, from BEUC's side, and from our members, we're more than happy to give that contribution as well. And the Hungarian presidency will have all our cooperation for sure. But just a quick note on the white paper again. As we move forward on this discussion, I think it's fundamental indeed that we have a consumer perspective. to be considered. And from our side, believe me, there is no lack of issues to be resolved when it comes to clarifying and improving the rules that we already have. From a lack of implementation to a slow implementation to a delayed implementation of the rules that we currently have that still haven't been given the fair chance to produce results. It's been mentioned already, the universal service obligations. This is something that clearly, from our perspective, has been seriously underused and still has the potential to deliver, and not just to resolve a lot of the issues consumers are facing in terms of affordability of connectivity, but also of accessibility of connectivity. For us, the idea of reaching the targets is fundamentally linked to the issue that we must prioritize investment precisely on the areas in which there is still no investment made. If we really are serious about reaching these targets, then we need to look at not just having a transversal approach to the deployment of infrastructure. We need to take a look at precisely where this investment is lacking, precisely who are the target areas and the target consumers that still do not have access to connectivity, and prioritize investment in those areas, which telcos, I'm afraid to say, still haven't been able to do, even despite public funding being available. Because sometimes the business perspective is not conciliable with the consumer perspective. And that is why regulation is so important, to fill in that gap. And that is why, going forward, we really encourage the Commission, we encourage member states, we encourage all the stakeholders involved to prioritize this discussion. Because this is the problem when we set out these targets in an abstract manner, these abstract targets with very concrete numbers. Sometimes we lose the perspective on the reason why we need to have connectivity for all. And if we really are serious about having connectivity for all by 2030, we need to have into consideration that targets aren't everything. Targets are not an end in themselves. The targets are set to make sure that all consumers, all citizens, can have access to what today is the digital revolution, and the fact that most basic consumer services are, from e-government, e-commerce, e-services, are indeed online, and they require that connection. So we must prioritize that, again, that consumer perspective, that people need connection to exert their fundamental rights as citizens, that people need connection in order to not to miss out on a digital revolution. We need that connection to bridge that digital divide. And therefore, the best way of doing so is to have regulation that builds in which we already have, and that improves what needs to be improved, but fundamentally that focuses on supporting the most vulnerable consumers and not supporting or trying to fill in for so-called low profitability levels of telcos. Regulatory objectives matter. Regulatory objectives are based on the priorities of fixing the market, improving the market. They shouldn't be dictating industrial policy. They shouldn't be used as an instrument to support or pick champions here and there. But they are there to make sure the market works, and they're there to fill in the gaps where the market cannot provide for those most vulnerable. And this is why we ask you to ensure and maintain, again, the consumer perspective when actually talking about reopening, regulating, clarifying, improving the rules we have on telecoms. That is all from my side, but of course, always happy to take questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Konstantinos, and thank you for reminding us of the importance of consumers in the debate. Also, I think for those of us that are moms and dads and that have children taking exams at the moment, targets are important, but it's not the only thing. So your grades are important, but it's a vision that matters. Let me now switch to the academic and global view at the same time with Konstantinos. So we've been focusing on the white paper and Brussels so far, but maybe you can open the discussion in terms of the internet ecosystem at large and the impact these discussions have beyond the EU.
Thank you for the invitation, and thank you very much for inviting me. So indeed, it is a deja vu kind of situation. I believe that around about this time last year, we were really talking more or less about the same thing. And it is really quite unfortunate that a year later, and despite the views of the majority within the European Union, we're still talking about this. I think that, you know, if consumers are mentioned 17 times, the terms open, global, and interoperable internet are not mentioned at all in the white paper. And it is fascinating to me that we're having a conversation about connectivity without an infrastructure investment, without taking into consideration how this plays within the larger internet ecosystem, and especially the way the internet works and its architecture. I have to admit that, you know, when I was reading the good paper, I think that it does a pretty good job in sort of initiating a conversation about where technology is going and what the infrastructure needs might be of that technology. And, you know, talking about the 3C networks and all that, and this symbiotic relationship between connectivity and computing, which has always been the case. This is not new, even though the white paper attempts to present it as new. Let's not forget that it was connectivity that gave birth to the decentralized internet, and it was the decentralized internet, the open, global, interoperable, that actually pushed connectivity to new heights, and and gave opportunities for telcos to actually innovate if they wanted to, which unfortunately they haven't. And I think that this is partly of where the problem is, because as innovation is happening very fast, and we are moving away now from the public infrastructure of the internet into the cloud, which are more privatized networks. We are actually seeing this anxiety from telcos to be able to tap into this territory. And this is actually the main problem for me with the white paper, that the paper attempts to, seeks to facilitate telcos, making sure that they are that they somehow become innovative, whereas it should be supporting and facilitating issues of connectivity and consumers and users. I would like to focus on three things on this, which we are actually also seeing playing out in the international context. The first one regards the diversity of infrastructure or lack thereof. The white paper really sort of sees infrastructure development in the context of connectivity as emanating as a very monolithic thing, that basically it's only the responsibility of telcos to contribute to their infrastructure, and does not take into account the work that has already been done by technology companies, CDNs, data centers, and so on and so forth. But it also fails to take into consideration the new operators that are emerging, and they were originally focusing in completely different areas of activities, but they are becoming now key infrastructure players. So you have municipalities, which have historically been responsible for other utilities like water, now have started to expand into communication services. Financial asset providers like private equities and hedge funds or pension funds, they're also part of this. We also have community-based efforts for connectivity, whether it is community networks or blended financing mechanisms that are really are playing a huge role in that. And then, as I mentioned, of course, you have the content application providers, and we've heard from both Amazon and the reps from both Amazon and Meta as to the work that they're doing and the technology they're deploying in order to be able and help with this increased volume of traffic that is taking place. So I think that if there is, one core issue that everybody agrees on, is that the fact that no single entity can actually be responsible for providing infrastructure and services, and that we need different models to provide connectivity, because either because we are talking about different networks altogether, or because there is separation between some infrastructure and services. The second point is really a network phase, and as I said, I really cannot believe we're still having this conversation. The Commission seems to be either not paying attention to what its stakeholders are saying, or not wanting to pay attention to what its stakeholders are saying. I think that the idea of a dispute resolution mechanism is actually, we need to call the spade of spade, right? It is a backdoor to network fees. I have talked about this extensively over the past couple of years. Effectively, what is going to happen is that it's going to change so fundamentally the interconnection environment and agreements that have been in place. And we've heard from, again, Meta, I believe that there are thousands that are happening every day, and they're smooth. There is really not an issue to intervene in such way. And the incredible thing about the open internet and the architecture of the internet and the fact that it has fostered those interconnection relationship is the fact that both sides that are participating, they want to be good internet citizens, which means that they want to do whatever they can in order to be able and maintain low cost for users and ensure that the user experience is not compromised. If you impose network fees, all that goes out of the window. And it's not just me that says that. It is technical organizations, it's consumer organizations, it is BEUC has said that. Literally everyone but telcos agree to that. And the irony of it all is that, of course, even the Commission seems to agree that the dispute resolution mechanism, that there's no basis or evidence for that to happen. And I'm literally reading right now and quoting verbatim from the white paper, which says, there are very few known cases of intervention by a regulatory authority or by a court into the contractual relationships between market actors that generally functions well, and so do the markets for transit and peering. And we also have, 2 days ago, BEUC released its latest report on the state of IP interconnection. And to sum up, they're literally saying there is no market failure and there is no reason for any regulatory intervention. And the last thing that I want to say is that the other thing that I found quite fascinating is how this conversation that is happening in Europe about connectivity is quite detached from the global conversation around connectivity that is happening currently within the UN, and actually Europe is participating. And this idea that Europe seems to be obsessing over, without, however, moving to define it, about digital sovereignty, which in this case seems to be all about, creating borders within Europe to ensure that Europe meets its targets, which of course they need to do, but they should not be doing this in silos. And I feel that this conversation is very much happening in silos and does not take into account the more global connectivity conversations and how they're shaping up. And I am concerned that Europe will be shutting itself off possible other ways to address connectivity gaps simply because it's approaching it the way it is. And the last thing that I want to make, which is that this whole idea of network fees is now getting elevated into a more foreign policy thing. And the reason that I'm saying issue, and the reason that I'm saying this, is that the recent strategy document that was released by the United States Department of State, which is, the strategy, the foreign policy strategy when it comes to digital issues, signals out network fees as one problem for the United States and for its foreign policy. So it will be very interesting to see whether, if Europe continues to insist, what this also will do to the relationship between the two allies in the future. And thank you, and happy to take, of course, any questions.
Thank you so much, Konstantinos, for broadening our horizon beyond the Brussels bubble, and for your views on the internet ecosystem as a whole. And now I'm going to switch to our last panelist, Dean. Considering that the thematic of this panel is the future of telecoms, it only seemed fitting to close with a futurist like you. So how close to reality do you feel that some of the predictions in this white paper are likely to be?
Thank you very much, Caroline. Firstly, can you hear me okay? I had problems with my microphone on an earlier call.
Yes, you're absolutely fine.
Excellent. Thank you. I mean, reading through the white paper and the discussion around it, I'm struck by a few things. I could talk for a very long time, but I'm going to focus on 3 topics here. The first is the continued discussion about level playing fields. I'm a big fan of analogies, and level playing field is an analogy, that term, and it refers to a situation where everyone is playing the same sport. So the central problem that I see with the predictions in the report is the idea that computing and communications are or will converge. And I don't think they will. I think that the principle of this sort of 3C vision is partly wishful thinking and partly an exaggeration of essentially normality for technology. Going back to the 1960s, we had mainframes with remote terminals. In the 1980s, we had ATM machines for our banking connected remotely. We've had the web since the 1990s, content delivery networks for 25 years, cloud of varying forms for similar amount of time as well. So this stuff's not new. And it's absolutely, there's interdependencies, but trying to say that we need to have the same regulations on each part of the technology environment it's a bit like saying that because occasionally you have cycling, running and swimming in a triathlon, that they should all have the same rules, which is obviously not reasonable. Or to use another analogy, intermodal transportation, where you have transportation of goods or passengers, say between shipping, trucks, trains, and so on. It would be ridiculous to have the same safety and inspection regime for a light van as for a freight train, even though they are, if you like, in some ways converged in the transportation sector. And so we need to sort of start really ask hard questions whenever we hear this phrase level playing field about what are the sports involved. And I think that where the European Commission is going with the paper is to say that they would like them to converge and that they would like the large traditional telcos to be the orchestrators of that 3C environment, which I can see why they're saying it, but it's just not borne out by reality. And they have a particular thing, and this fits in with the view on targets, that somehow edge cloud is the glue that allows that all to happen. And there's this arbitrary target of 10,000 edge cloud nodes in the digital decade targets, which bears no relationship with the reality of how and where edge computing is used or is likely to be used in future. And the vision is that maybe if we can pretend that 10,000 virtual mice can pretend to be an elephant, then maybe we can provide a European hyperscaler equivalent as well, and the telcos can be the circus ringmaster with this virtual elephant. And it's simply unrealistic. That there are separate markets and they're not going to converge the edge in that way. Edge compute is important. It's actually more important for the telcos for various reasons, for running their radio networks or their local distribution points for fiber. But that's they're customers of edge rather than suppliers. Second point I want to make is around, there's a lot of comment in the white paper about 5G, and it also talks about future of 6G. And I think we need to learn the lessons of 5G and what we got wrong, both in terms of the technology, but also in terms of expectations, before we then apply that to how we think 6G should evolve, what we want to do in terms of things like spectrum policy for it. And I think that half the problem has been that 5G hasn't met its initial expectations. It's nothing to do with a single market or fragmentation. It's to do with the fact that no one understood that 5G came in phases. And so all the delay pretty much has been down to getting proper 5G or standalone 5G, which has largely been a software problem. It's not about spectrum. It's about, again, cloud and orchestration of lots of microservices and a whole bunch of internal technology issues, which have been the delay, not spectrum policy by and large. And the other thing that doesn't even get surfaced at all in this report is the fact that most of the use cases that we expect from 5G to be useful, like the automation, healthcare, education, gaming, they're indoors. And nowhere do we talk about indoor connectivity connectivity, whether it's cellular, whether it's Wi-Fi, whether it's the operators, whether it's shared indoor infrastructure. And actually, if you look at what China does, for example, they have among their 3 million 5G base stations, 1 million of them for indoor use. And there is no policy at all mentioned in there at all of what happens beyond the front door. We might have fiber or 5G to the outside wall, but nothing about inside. And given that our environmental regulations are meaning we will have ever more insulated buildings, which essentially are wireless Faraday cages, this will become an even more pressing problem in the 2030 timeframe. So I think that there needs to be a reset of the targets based on the realities of how networks work, how people, where they're used, and also who deploys them. There was no reference originally in digital decade to private networks and use of enterprises to run their own networks, potentially in locally licensed spectrum. And that's also an issue here. And that's my final point here, is that there's a lack of understanding that actually, in many ways, fragmentation is good. And this follows on from Konstantinos' point just now. We've got all these newcomers, the municipalities, there's neutral host companies, the private equity companies, the tower companies. You have, in some parts of Europe, utility companies buying or building networks, satellite, communities, open access fiber providers. And yet, rather than recognizing that diversity is driving consumer benefit, business benefit, we have an expectation that maybe we should get rid of wholesale regulation, which again benefits the large traditional telcos, but not these newcomers. So I'd almost like to say that, to use my final analogy, that the white paper is something of an asteroid, but it's an asteroid that's designed to protect the dinosaurs and kill the mammals. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Dean. I already had that virtual mice image in my head, and now I have an asteroid. So I'm going to have a difficult time this evening getting rid of all of the analogies in my head. Thank you so much to all of you for this helpful analysis, and maybe it will also help people that are thinking about their contributions to the consultation on the white paper. We've just received a very actually I had prepared, in case there was no question in the comments, a question, but there's actually a question that came in that is close to what I was going to ask as a roundup question for all the panelists, because obviously you've all said, you know, what you think about the white paper, or at least portions of the white paper, how you feel about it. And some of it is positive, some is more doubtful. But I think one of the messages that came across, and I'm just going to see if I can show the question that was posted to everyone, is the fact that quite a few of you have suggested a different approach to the idea of digital targets, to the one that has initially been proposed by the Commission, so alternatives. And the question is, and looking at the title of this panel, which is A Vision Beyond Targets, let's look at those targets and see what could be the objective pursued by connectivity policy in Europe. What is a better way, maybe, to, on the one hand, spur infrastructure providers to do better, be quicker, but to also be realistic and not create expectations that are impossible to meet, or that do not address actual consumer demand. I'm going to go through the order of speakers as we did initially. So I'm going to start with Petra, and actually you're going to have to preempt your work that you will be doing under the Hungarian presidency.
No, I'm not gonna preempt the work we are planning to do. So what I can say in terms of this question is just basically kind of repeat myself. So we also think that this is a really important question, that we have to deal with it. And we thought as Hungarian presidency that this is a topic that's worth having discussed even at ministerial levels. So that's why we are planning to put it on our agenda at the Telecom Council meeting in December. And I'm really looking forward to that discussion, and have the views of the member states even at ministerial level. So I'm not trying to predict anything about the outcome of that discussion, but let's wait for that and see where we get with the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra. I kind of guessed that I was putting you in a hard spot on that one, considering the program of the presidency. Let me switch to Brian. Your thoughts?
Any target should be grounded in an examination of genuine demand side needs. And on the supply side, I just think ubiquity is important. That's indoor and outdoor. But to get to that in a cost-effective way, you have to kind of move beyond a gigabit vision and think of something more modest, which just works everywhere. Okay.
Thank you so much, Brian. That's a very practical way of looking at it. Lotte, your members have a lot of pressure because of those targets. Any way we can alleviate it?
Yeah, I mean, now I'm thinking about the question about the take-up targets. That is indeed important, and you know, I've also been in this industry for a number of years. Always understood that this is really a supply-driven market we're in. So we come with some new technologies, and then you know the demand will take up eventually, and that has also been you know the case for quite many generations of technologies. Maybe until we got from 4G to 5G, where consumers they realized, okay, we can download this movie in 2 seconds faster, and but that has been what they've been getting. I think the question of take-up targets is interesting. I'm less certain that this is something for the EU as such, but this could be something that the EU could coordinate. But this is definitely something that reside with member states, I would say, and they should be encouraged, as I think I've also seen in the Digital Decade report, that there is a job to be done at the side of member states to encourage take-up. And I'm thinking about digitization of public sector, of companies, and so on.
Thank you, Lotte. Let's now see alternative operators. Which targets or beyond targets?
Well, I would say since the policymaker has established these targets and they are really challenging, I think we have to look a bit more now to the second side of the coin, because until now we really have looked at the first side of the coin, which is the supply side. So maybe we have to be a bit more involved in the demand side. And in order to be involved in the demand side, I a bit agree on with Lotte. It always passes from the supply side. So we have to work on the incentivizing the take-up. And the take-up is very important because it drives the profitability and it drives, of course, the revenue flows on the built networks, such as the FTTH, such as the 5G. So it's very important probably to think about some incentive schemes to ensure that the customer gets and effectively ready to activate fiber line, for instance. And then let's have also a wider view, because we know that there are really, really rural areas which are very, very costly, in fact, to finance. And on that ones, when I refer to VHCN, I refer also to the fact that in these very specific areas, we can go also to the technologies which are not effectively FTTH. For instance, just to mention, one is FWA. There are some of our members which are investing in FWA successfully. And for what concerns the targets that have been set. In fact, we think that now we have to work more on the demand side. But in order to ensure the demand side, let's not abandon the wholesale access regulation, because the wholesale access regulation, even the more now, is needed in order to stimulate, maybe in those areas, a competition which is based on services, where there is no feasible infrastructure-based competition that can be reached. So now, again, another point to sustain, do not abandon, do not change the access policy, because it works well, and now it is even the more should be focused on those areas in order to stimulate the demand through the competition.
Thank you, Pinar, for reminding us the benefits of competition, both in terms of rollout of infrastructure and services. You mentioned some areas are difficult to reach with fiber or traditional infrastructure. Jordi, what are your views about the targets?
Thank you. I think it's a great question. Look, I think coming back to some comments from previous panelists, I think we share the goal of bridging the digital divide, as Cláudio from BEUC mentioned, and I think it is helpful as well to have targets, including supply side based targets. But I think the main point is that they need, as Brian said, they need to be based on evidence, and they need to be linked to what consumers are demanding. And so I think the way we see one can bridge the digital divide in Europe is by utilizing the three technologies that we have available. Fiber is a great technology when you are living in a densely populated area. It's a cost-efficient technology to deploy there. But then you have other technologies that are more efficient for rural remote areas, like LEO broadband or also 5G fixed wireless access. So we need to think about how we bridge the digital divide with those three technologies. You can do it by just picking one and subsidizing fiber everywhere in all EU households, but you need to recognize that there are opportunity costs associated with that choice, because financial resources are not infinite, and so we think you shouldn't be putting the cart before the horse. Let's look at at demand, and I think if you look at demand, what customers are needing right now is a broadband connectivity at around 100 megs per second, and that's something that technology like LEO broadband can provide.
Thank you, Jordi. Phillip, Meta's views on the targets?
Yeah, where to start? So first, I think it'd be helpful to strip targeting and projection out of political debate. I know that's probably an impossibility, but I think it ends up becoming quite warped. Get together a team of 10 very serious economists once a year to do a serious piece of work to understand what is happening, why is it happening, and most importantly, what's the best way to incentivize the behaviors which perhaps politically you have to deem are optimal. I think there's a lot to learn from certain spectrum auction processes where creating the right economic incentives for someone to create a business model is important. Start getting creative with these things, start rewarding countries financially who meet targets, start offering them some of the money that was sat there from the COVID recovery funds if they, are the highest performing country in terms of investment in infra. Start making something that changes the game a little bit on these targets, because if not, I think we'll be in another repetitive conversation of why are we under the targets that we set. So I wouldn't say it's about what targets we set. I think targets are important, but I think there's a really serious discussion to have about how do we come about these targets and what purpose do they play.
Thank you, Phillip. Cláudio, targets and consumers, how do you see that working?
Well, indeed, I think it's very important to understand that in the end, indeed, we're talking about people. And when targets, of course, aren't a bad thing in themselves, but it's important that when we're talking about targets and we're setting these numerical figures in advance, it is very important that these targets should not predetermine future regulatory or enforcement intervention to the extent that they indeed go against public interest objectives. There should be no trading off between reaching the targets first and foremost against all odds, against everything, to the cost of potentially, in this case, a pro-competitive framework of protecting competition, protecting consumer interests. And this is what the regulation in Europe has done when it comes to telecoms. It's a very delicate balance between promoting competition, enlarging the single market, and protecting consumer interests. And once we start diluting industrial policy under the guise of the imperative of reaching the targets no matter the cost, not saying that this is the motto, but it kind of sounds like these days, there is a possibility that we lose focus of the reason why these targets were set in the first place. So it's very important that these targets do not become the mantra, do not become the end in themselves, and we always keep our eyes on the prize, which is making sure that in the end of the day everyone gets connected. So, but what you've asked very, very well about what does that mean in terms of actually delivering for people, delivering for consumers, how to actually reach those targets in an effective way. Well, that's precisely where we also want to make this point, which is even if the idea is indeed to reach the targets by 2030, no matter what, even there we have to think that maybe this is not, this narrative is being said that is the best way of going about it. And even there, of course, we do have doubts that this is indeed the best way of delivering the said results. From our perspective, if we're indeed trying to tackle this lack of investment, I think we need to focus on, if we're trying to reach the targets, where is the invest lacking and the reasons why it's lacking. And this has been an objective reality for a long time. It's the fact that simply in some member states in particular, but also in some others as a general rule, there are still areas which remain that is simply not profitable enough for telcos to deploy infrastructure there. Even though the rules have, the telecom rules have provided through the universal service obligations, mechanisms through which public funding should be allocated precisely to those areas where it's not as profitable, there is no business case. But the fact is, and our German member has been very active on this, for instance, Fakó, and they've said very well that even with the public funding available, it's still not profitable enough for these telcos to go in there and deploy this infrastructure. And it's still not being done. So something must change, but at this level, which is we need to make sure the rules that are in place then deliver enough when it comes to ensuring that telcos are indeed nudged to deploy infrastructure even when there is no business case. This is for us the best approach. This is something we can build on to ensure that indeed if there is going to be investment, the rules ensure this investment is channeled through project-specific, target-allocated projects that are precisely to deploy this infrastructure where it's needed. This is how you reach targets. This is how you cover the most underserved areas. This is how you address the issue of consumers who cannot afford or cannot access connectivity. And so this is, again, going back to what I said initially, the consumer-centric approach. This is how we best address all of the above. The current narrative, however, in counterpoint that we see being addressed, simply does not even reach that essential threshold, which is what it proposes to do, which is to reach those targets. We simply do not believe by putting the levels of profitability of telcos first, or looking this through the glass of the competitive with other global peers, which we even said, even the data questions the fact that we are so lagging behind. If you look at the US market, from a consumer perspective, I can assure you that we are not lagging behind at all. In terms of consumer service and consumer welfare, we are definitely the best market to be in. All data shows that. Most affordable price, best quality of service, more competition for operators. I don't think any customer in the US would trade an AT&T or Verizon offer for the offer of a European operator in Europe. With 4 times higher the price, less consumer choice, less offers, and lowest quality of service, I really doubt you would see that scenario happening. So it's always a bit weird for us to see this being used as the counterpoint, somehow sunlit uplands to which we somehow must aim for. And so we urge caution when making these comparisons. And we urge caution when being said that somehow there is a better model out there to deliver these investments. I think the rules have shown over the last 30 years that we already have the rules that can deliver on this. We just need to make sure that, number one, they're enforced, and number two, that they're clarified and ensured that they can meet the challenges of today. And from our perspective, the challenge hasn't changed. To serve the people who until now still haven't had a fair shot at having a decent connectivity to perform most basic services. This is how we address the challenges consumers have. This is how we address most of the complaints that consumers have today. And this is how we make a better market for everyone. But most importantly, this is how ultimately we will reach those targets. And this is how ultimately we will have everyone connected by 2030. Support consumers, not companies.
Thank you, Cláudio. That came from the heart, I feel. You've just had an invoice from a Belgian telecom operator, I think. You've just had a warning that the prices were going to increase again. Konstantinos, with your academic and global hat on, what do you think about the targets?
I am going to repeat what everybody has said. I pretty much agree with most of the comments, and especially with what Cláudio was saying. I think that it is okay to set targets, and we need to be setting targets because we need to get somewhere. But getting somewhere is really not the ultimate goal, right? I mean, it is how we get there that really matters. And I think that Cláudio mentioned it. And I mentioned it also in my intervention, the need, Europe needs to incentivize and invite investment in its infrastructure from different players. I think that if the connectivity gaps and the connectivity targets that Europe has been setting throughout the past decades, frankly, were to be met, they would have been met by telcos. The reason that telcos are not providing connectivity in some parts of Europe is simply because their business model is not structured in a way to do that. Cláudio said it, and I agree. Where there is no money to be made, there is no connectivity. And I think, and this is their business model. And that is why in those past few years, in those decades, we have seen other initiatives and innovative thinking emerging in terms of how to reach connectivity. I've mentioned in the beginning community networks. When I was, I know that when I was with the Internet Society, we were building literally community networks in Georgia because no operator would go there. And actually, they managed to meet the needs of that population. And those community networks then become bigger businesses, and they become very substantial players that provide connectivity. We're also mentioned, as I mentioned, there are also other players, whether it is municipalities or hedge funds. So you need to, those targets is not that if you open up and appreciate those players, suddenly your markets will be met, but certainly they will push the needle furthermore in actually meeting those targets rather than creating a framework where everything is premised around 5 big telcos and you're trying to convince everyone in Europe that all your hopes for connectivity and all your expectations on connectivity should rely on those 5 players. Otherwise, if they don't meet, then you'll never be connected. I think that this is such a bad story to tell to the people of Europe, and we really need to change the narrative.
Thank you, Konstantinos. So I'm understanding less focus on the targets and more focus on how to address the gaps. Dean, do you have solutions?
Yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts. First one, I would say, is we should be focused on good metrics, not easy metrics. And I think that historically we've collected the data that was easy to collect: the number of minutes of phone calls, the number of homes passed on the street. Some basically fairly non-granular, easy to collect data that wasn't a big administrative burden for a few telecom operators. And we've tried to design our policy around those numbers that we can obtain. But increasingly, we can start with a fresh sheet of paper and decide what are the numbers that actually tell us that we're delivering what we want to deliver, whether it's homes connected, whether it's connectivity to every room rather than every house, for example. Rather than looking at sort of data traffic numbers or something like that, we could split it out between fixed wireless access and mobile broadband, or use for different applications. And the nice thing here is that we've got an increasing array of tools to get the data we need, whether that's crowdsourcing. Frankly, we can use AI tools to estimate data that people can't create, if you like, hard numbers for. So I think that we can almost like look at the targets that we have. Some are nonsense, like the edge 10,000 edge node one is arbitrary from a misreading of a 2017 Gartner report, as far as I can tell. I tried to do some archaeology on where that number came from. And so I think some of them definitely need to be either revised completely or redefined. And I think we need to be quite careful about definitions. But also, I think we just need to think of what would in an ideal world, what data would we have? What targets would we use from that? How often would we revise them? And what new sources of the quantitative information as well as qualitative can we get access to? And I would actually say that sort of AI generated data for, what's a good way of comparing, say, a high density market with a low density market, or a market like some markets have 75% of homes are in apartments or multi-dwelling units, with others in Europe are 15%. And clearly the way you build networks and the targets you have should probably reflect the reality of the physical environment we live in, as much as some idealized across the board numbers. So I think that those are the angles I'd take on this.
Thank you, Dean, and thank you everyone for those extremely useful contributions. I'm mindful of time. I didn't expect that a debate about the future of telecoms would give me so many animals during the discussions. I've had mice, horse, and dinosaurs talked about in no particular order. I encourage everyone that is listening to this debate or that will pick up the recording to read the white paper, to contribute to the consultation, even if it's just one page. I think it's useful to get as many views as possible, and I think it's helpful to the Commission to understand, what lives in the community and what people want to see, and the constraints and difficulties that industry faces. Thank you so much. Enjoy sunny Brussels. It doesn't happen often, so let's be happy about it. And probably we will have more debates on this white paper and on the outcome of the consultation. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.